that jihad that was referred to, this jihad of Imam Ali alayhi salam, was both outward and inward. It was one that sought to control his own self, his own desires, to struggle solely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and not for any other. And so, this is something that we ourselves need to, develop and build. Our condition as youth here in the West is one that is often, what attracts us? How do we spend our time? We have to watch ourselves, in falling into the trap of materialism, consumerism, where we're spending our time watching TV only, and where our desire is one for making money to buy the next gadget. And this is something that we have to focus on, which is virtue, vice. It's something that unfortunately has almost been erased from our vocabulary. To building our virtues, to conquering our vice, to being people who are noble human beings, who have have almost like perfected or sought to perfect certain qualities. Have we sought to increase our patience? Or are we impatient? Are we honest, or are we corrupt? Are we courageous? Are we cowardly? These are virtues that we need to work on within ourselves, so that your emblem, when you have perfected a certain virtue within yourself, you become emblematic of that you are that person, the Sadiq, the Amin, the truthful one, the honest one. This is a person who's courageous. Have we built these within ourselves? And that's something that we have, as youth, need to exert our, time and energies towards. There's many of you probably heard of Allama Iqbal. He's a famous philosopher, poet in the South Asian Islamic world. And he has a really nice quote. He says, ever since the beginning, two opposing forces have been at war, virtue and vice. Thus Prophet Musa rose against Pharaoh, and Shabir rose against Yazid. Yazid is the symbol of vice. Shabir, Imam Hussein alayhi salam, is the symbol of virtue. When the Quran relays these stories of Pharaoh and Moses, it isn't a historical narrative only. It's to provide symbols. Who are you? Where do you relate vis-a-vis these archetypes? Are you someone who's sincere? Are you insincere? Are you reliable? Are you unreliable? Are we honing in on our virtues, or are we degenerating with these vices? And unfortunately, when we look at our society and the condition of our society here, it seems that vice is very prevalent, and these traits of vice are also becoming things that are clinging to us as well. We begin to become influenced by the vice that's out there, and are almost complacent to it, to the degree that we begin to be like that which we associate with. So that's something that inshallah, I hope that all of us can work towards, because that is where that struggle is. It's between virtue against vice. So I won't dwell on this at any length, but there's another concept as well that comes into play with jihad, and that is hijrah and migration. As you struggle, you also migrate. You migrate from a state of no God but God. that, or other gods to God, from falsehood to truth, from vice to virtue. There is a hijrah that takes place. And we find in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, in this following sequence, and the sequence is also important, وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَهَاجَرُوا وَجَاهَدُوا. Those who believed, migrated, and struggled in the way of Allah. For them shall be forgiveness, the verse later on says, and a noble provision. And Rasulullah ﷺ was asked, what is the best iman? What is the best of faith? And he says, to utter with sincerity the shahada, that there's no God but Allah. What is the best Islam? The follow-up question was, he says, the best is jihad, the struggle. And then it continues, what is the best jihad? And he replies, it is hijrah, it is to migrate. And that a man should flee from evil to good. So here's, kind of an example of someone who did just that. Some of you may know of Bishr al-Hafi. Here's a person who was one of the aristocrats at the time of Imam Musa al-Kadhim alayhi salam. And Imam Musa al-Kadhim alayhi salam was passing by his house. And, he heard these sounds of merrymaking, of music, of the signs of alcohol, and all of that. And at that point, as he was walking across and he was listening to this, the maid of Bishr had come out to throw out the trash. So he he kind of he asks her, although he knows very well. He says, "Who is the owner of this house? Is he a free man or is he a slave?" And she replies, "Well, of course, this is the house of this aristocrat, Bishr. Of course he's a free man." So the Imam responds to her. He says, "Yes, it seems so. Because if he was a slave, he would not be doing what he is doing." And he goes on his way. So the maid returns back into the house, and Bishr asks her, what took you? What took you so long? And so she relays the incident, and he asks her, well, describe this man. And so she described him, and he knew who that man was Imam Musa al-Kadhim alayhi salam. So he runs out of his house, barefooted, and he goes to the feet of the Imam, comes down to his feet, weeping and sobbing, asking for forgiveness, and he says, "Oh Imam, I want to change from being to being a slave." And what he's referring to here is what? The slave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So here is a man, and that act of running out of the house barefooted became a term that was associated with his name forever thereafter, and it was a badge of pride for him. That he migrated from that state of vice to the state of virtue. So, in Karbala, not only did we see the Jihad al-Asghar taking place on the deserts of Karbala, but we also see it taking place in the landscape of the souls, both in terms of the companions of Imam Hussein salam as well as his members of his family. For instance, we find the struggle both outward and inward of Sayyidah Zaynab alayhi salam. Here she is, with the body of her brother before her. And what does she say? Look at the struggle of this great woman. She says, "Rabbana taqabbal minna hadha al-Qur'an bi-qurban." "Oh Allah, accept from us this sacrifice." Imagine the state of her mind, that she's completely submitted to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that no resentment, no anger, she conquered all of that. And in fact, when she was taunted in the courtyards of the governor of Kufa, how do you feel that this, that Allah took the life of Imam Hussein? She says, "Ma ra'ayta hu illa jamila." I do not see anything in it but beauty. Can you imagine? you know, how this great woman had struggled, not just outwardly, but inwardly, that she completely mastered herself. So this isn't the Zaynab who sometimes is portrayed as the one who's wailing and beating, and no, not at all. She has perfect composure. You know, obviously, the tragedy of Karbala had affected her naturally like it would any human being. Obviously there were tears, but here was a sober woman that never was humiliated, always had that presence of mind. So she is, you know, someone who had attained victory in that greater jihad, as she did in the lesser one as well. And we find in Imam Hussein himself, he says, "Oh Allah, what did he find who lost you? And what did he lose who found you?" You know, so this is the Jihad al-Akbar that takes place within the Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, as well as their companions. I want to make sure, and I know that I've taken a considerable amount of time, I wanted to make sure that I end at some practical note. You know, what can we do in terms of combating that self? And this is coming from the 40 hadith of Imam Khomeini. It's a profound work, and in it he provides 7 steps on what can we do to engage in that inner struggle. The first step, he says, is contemplation, which is that introspection. It's that self-reflection. It's to contemplate on what is, on existence. What is our purpose? What is our duty? First and foremost. And then, the question arises is, are you satisfied with yourself? So that begins the process. The questions of, what is my duty to my Creator? Am I satisfied with myself? Then, comes the position of will and resolution. The will and resolution to not commit sins. The will and resolution to perform the wajibat. The will and the resolution, to be resolved to acquiring virtues and to eliminating our vices. Now, after you have that will and resolution, and after all, we're in the new year, right? It's that time of resolutions, and to have a strong will. It requires what? Why do New Year's resolutions often fail, right? Is there a follow-up? Is there effort? Is there struggle? So it requires that jihad. It requires that effort and that, that struggle to attain that, your will, your resolution to be a better person, to acquire virtue, to eliminate the vices from your life. But then it does, virtue, vice. It's something that, unfortunately, has almost been erased from our vocabulary. To building our virtues, to conquering our vice, to being, people who are noble human beings, who have, have almost like perfect. And so, this is something that we ourselves need to, develop and build. Our condition as youth here in the West is one that is often, what attracts us? How do we spend our time? We have to watch ourselves, in falling into the trap of materialism. That jihad that was referred to, this jihad of Imam Ali alayhi salam, was both outward and inward. It was one that sought to control his own self, his own desires, to struggle solely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and not for any other. Perfected or sought to perfect certain qualities. Have we sought to, increase our patience? Or are we impatient? Are we honest? Or are we corrupt? Are we courageous? Are we cowardly? These are virtues that consumerism, where we're spending our time watching TV only, and where our desire is one for making money to buy the next gadget. And this is, something that we have to focus on, which is